Good afternoon, everyone. You're all very welcome to a sunny Dublin and many other spots here in Europe for the public debriefing of the 63rd Ordinary BEREC plenary meeting that took place last week in Reykjavik in Iceland. It was less sunny there at the time. For information, just so you know, the next public debrief will take place on the 8th of October. It will be done in person in the IRG offices in Brussels. So note that date down already, the 8th of October. Today's program follows the usual script. It consists of two parts with questions and answers after each part of the agenda. The first part will focus on three of the topics that we discussed at the plenary, namely the draft BEREC strategy for 2026 until 2030, and then two GIA guidelines that we had to produce, one on Article 5.6 and the other one relating to Article 11.6. After the three presentations, we do the Q&A, and then a second part will commence with one presentation on domestic submarine cables and a number of miscellaneous remarks from myself, and then again we can do a Q&A for questions. Please submit your questions online and we will try to answer them all. Now, let me pass to the co-chairs of BEREC's Planning and Future Trends Working Group, Maria Ruiz from the CNMC and Katia Mercantonio from Agicom. Katia is our latest and newest co-chair in BEREC, but many of you will know her from her being the co-chair of the Sustainability Expert Group previously. And then after they have done their presentation, they will hand over to the co-chairs of the Fixed Network Evolution Working Group. That's Alexander Thelen from BNetza and Francois Weber from ARCEP, who will set out BEREC's consultation on the two sets of guidelines required under the Gigabit Infrastructure Act. But now first, Maria and Katia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Robert. Welcome to everybody. Next slide, please. The draft BEREC strategy until 2030 reviews and consolidates the previous three strategies and the action plan 2030. As in this constituency period, it is too early to have a clear picture of future developments. This strategy factors in the possibility of a midterm review. The structure of the document progresses as follows: market and technological developments, policy and legislative changes, high-level priorities, namely 5 priorities, Maria will single them out, institutional and international cooperation. Next slide to Maria.
You're on mute.
Sorry, I was muted. I will start again, sorry. So I was explaining that, as Katia was mentioning, the draft 2026-2030 strategy updates and adjusts the previous one in view of the market and technological developments, as well as the sectoral European policies and legislation approved in the last years. So having this approach in mind, some adjustments have been made in the business statement that now reads as BEREC aims at fostering independent, forward-looking, consistent and high-quality regulation of digital infrastructures and services for the benefit of Europe and its citizens. Then we define the strategic priorities, and we still look at Article 3 of the code that establishes the four policy objectives that guide the regulatory activities. First, connectivity and single markets. And here we consider the investments required for very high capacity networks, including 5G and 6G, as well as developments such as the integration of non-terrestrial networks with the terrestrial networks. And we also underline BEREC's work to promote the single market. Then we also have a priority on fostering competition, competition in electronic communications and also in related digital services, considering, for example, the participation in the high-level group to support the enforcement of the DMA. We following this Article 3, we have also among our priorities the promotion of the interests of the European citizens in terms, for example, of transparency, digital inclusion, end users' choice, and open internet. Those priorities from Article 3 are complemented with a new priority that was defined in the BEREC Action Plan 2030, published in 2023. That is contributing to environmentally sustainable, secure, and resilient digital infrastructures. And finally, from a more operational perspective, final priority aims at reinforcing BEREC's capabilities and continuous improvements. Next slide, please. This draft strategy will be open for public consultation until the 15th of July. Then a final document considering all the inputs received and the public consultation summary will be published in mid-December 2025. And now I pass the floor to the Fixed Network Evolution co-chairs, Alexander Tellen and François Weber.
Thanks, Katia. So I will start with Article 5 of the Gigabit Infrastructure Act, on which BEREC was tasked to draft guidelines. Next slide, please. Next slide, yes. So as a reminder, the Gigabit Infrastructure Act was adopted last year, and it will fully enter into force in November this year. Its aim is to facilitate and stimulate the rollout of VHCNs, and it comes to replace and complement the BCRD directive with the main provisions which are in the continuation of this directive: access sharing to physical infrastructure obligation, coordination of civil works, but also some novelty about permit granting facilitation or gathering of information and procedures into electronic single information points. Next slide, please. So the Article 5 I'm going to talk about is the article about the obligation made for physical infrastructure owners to meet any reasonable request to coordinate civil works. It applies not only to electronic communication operators, but also to electricity operators, for instance, or road, or even gas, for instance. The guideline has to cover three issues, which I will develop then: the apportioning of the cost associated with the coordination, the criteria the dispute settlement body should follow in case there is a dispute on that kind of topic, and a third, more technical topic about an exception of this obligation, which I'll explain later on. Next slide, please. So about the apportioning of the cost, we think that we have to distinguish two kinds of costs. First, the cost which can be directly attributed to one of the party, and in that case, they should be borne by this party. The other cost, which has to be analyzed on a case-by-case basis, but we give quite a list of what it can look like, They have to be shared, and we recommend the use of an objective formula or a few objective formulas reflecting either an equity principle or a proportionality principle. We provide in the guideline some examples which are non-exhaustive of formulas which can be used. Next slide, please. About the criteria to settle disputes, first, we believe that all major principles which apply in every dispute settlement should still apply. For instance, the transparency of the procedure. So we remind in the guidelines all these important principles which in any topics related to access to any infrastructure should remain in a dispute settlement. What is very specific to the GIA dispute settlement, and especially on these ones, is the time constraint, because GIA has shortened the time frame to settle disputes to 1 month. This can work only if information sharing is really swift. Next slide. So because of that, first, if too many information is missing and it's foreseen in the national procedure rules, GIA allows for extension of this 1 month deadline, even though it has to remain exceptional. So to help avoid this kind of situation, these guidelines provide a list of suggested information demands which have to be met before the dispute settlement starts if the parties wish the 1 month deadline to be feasible. And also in the same vein, to smooth negotiations, we suggest an optional standard model agreement which can be used both for negotiations, but also to give some guidance about what the settlement can look like. Next slide, please. So the last item is about an exception which is introduced in GIA about this obligation to allow coordination. This case concerns areas where there has been, for instance, a public call for interest to deploy fiber, and the party asking for coordination didn't reply to this call. In that situation, the party asked for coordination has a right to refuse it, but only if they deploy physical infrastructure with sufficient capacity to deal with future third-party foreseeable needs. And we are asked in this guideline to provide a methodology to estimate what these foreseeable reasonable needs are. Next slide, please. So the suggested methodology covers several steps. First, we have to estimate the needs, and not only the number of end users, but really the needs. Because, for instance, you have to take into account that you have households, but you also have businesses, and businesses can have larger needs than end users in terms of number of fibers. Then you have to deduce from that the volume of fiber necessary to cover these requirements. And then from that, you have to estimate what physical infrastructure you need in terms of volume of ducts or what kind of poles you should put, depending if you are underground or on aerial. We provide some examples of models and formulas for that last step. Next slide, please. So with that, I've covered most of the main items in the guidelines. Of course, there are much more details in the documents. We have to adopt, according to the legal mandate, these guidelines by November the 12th. So to stick to that deadline, we will launch the public consultation today. And it will end by July the 11th, close of business, and we won't be able to accept any late contribution. Thank you. And I leave the floor to Alexander for similar work on Article 11.
Thank you, Francois. Yes, I would like now to present the draft BEREC guidelines on access to in-building physical infrastructure according to Article 11 of the Gigabit Infrastructure Act. Next slide, please. So on Article 11, the legal mandate introduces basically an obligation for physical infrastructure owners to meet any reasonable request to access in-building physical infrastructure. And Article 11, paragraph 6 of the Gigabit Infrastructure Act sets out two topics to be covered, and that is one, the terms and conditions of access, and two, also procedural guidelines setting criteria that the dispute settlement body should follow when settling disputes. But this chapter runs very much in parallel to the Article 5 guidelines that Francois just presented. Next slide, please. So on the first topic, the terms and conditions of access, there is a differentiation in the draft guidelines depending on the ownership of the in-building physical infrastructure. When the in-building physical infrastructure is owned by the building owner, the draft BEREC guidelines recommend that access should generally be provided for free. The reasons that we elaborate on are mainly the three reasons that you see on the slide. One, the current practice in most member states. This reflects the current practice in most member states. Two, we have to interpret the GIA also under on the backdrop of its overarching goal that network can be rolled out faster and at a lower cost. And three, we also see the added value for the building owner that has this type of infrastructure in place. Next slide, please. If the in-building physical infrastructure, however, is owned by a electronic communication networks operator, some other considerations seem to be relevant. So a first observation is that typically in this situation, the infrastructure will already host fiber wiring. And the draft guidelines suggest that the DSBs, the dispute settlement bodies, should at least consider access to fiber before immediately jumping to access to the physical infrastructure. However, terms and conditions of access to fiber are not covered in these guidelines. They are governed by other legal provisions and are out of scope of these guidelines. Fair and reasonable prices to in-building physical infrastructure now should not deplete a reasonable first mover advantage if this infrastructure is owned by an ECN operator, and when the in-building physical infrastructure is owned by an ECN operator, pricing should be based on evidence, and because of the unlimited number of different cases that are possible here, we suggest to keep a methodology quite simple. Next slide, please. As I already mentioned, the second topic of the guidelines is again criteria for the dispute settlement body to settle these disputes. This chapter runs very much in parallel to what we are laying out in the Article 5 guidelines that Francois just presented. So again, general dispute settlement rules should apply the same way as before. Information sharing needs to be swift. And if there is missing information, there may be the need to suspend or extend the 1-month deadline. And of course, transparency of information is of this information requirement is provided through a list of suggested information demands. Next slide, please. So this also concludes my presentation. Next steps also very much in parallel to the Article 5 guidelines. Adoption is foreseen. There is a legal deadline 12th of November. And I just want to reiterate the need to reply to our consultation by 11th of July, close of business, in order to allow us to meet that legal deadline. Thank you very much for your understanding on this important point, and thank you very much for listening. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you, Alexander. Thank you, Francois. And before that, thank you, Maria and Katja. We will now pause to take some questions and hopefully be able to answer them as well. And we have received one question from Deutsche Telekom, from Anton Horschow, that reads, do you plan to include competitiveness of the EU digital communication industry into the priorities reflecting, for example, the Draghi report? Before I hand over to Katja, how the co-chairs intend to deal with this over the term of the strategy, let me say the following. We will do whatever legislation demands from us. At the moment, as you know, the strategic objectives that regulators have to follow are those to promote competition, to promote investment, to look after consumer welfare. Those are the kind of things that are currently in the law and that we have to follow. We've had a discussion with the Commission whether things like competitiveness or sustainability should be added. And in the end, that is up to the co-legislators to decide. What I do think that what BEREC thinks about this is if you add too many objectives to the list, then the list becomes less and less relevant. And you can't take all those things at the same time into consideration. So you have to have a careful view on what the objectives are. And BEREC feels that if we have a competitive market and we stimulate competition, then out of that comes a strong industry that can withstand international competitiveness as well. So there is a little bit of a hierarchy that we need to deal with. But I will hand over to Katja now to add anything that she wants to say in terms of the draft strategy. Katja.
Thank you very much, Robert. Thank you for your question, which comes in a period of strong geopolitical changes. So it's a very important question. As a matter of fact, I can only remark one aspect already highlighted by Robert, that the competitiveness has a growing importance in this new geopolitical scenario. We are all aware of that, but we are a network of regulators, and as such, we can, our range is designed by the legislators. So for sure, we will include the competitiveness amongst our priorities, but under the scope of the jurisdiction that the forthcoming Digital Networks Act will design for us. Thank you.
Very good. I hope that answers your question, Anton. Just to reiterate, the deadline for response to the GIA guidelines is the 11th of July, and for the draft BEREC strategy, the public consultation is out until the 15th of July. Let's move to the second part of our agenda. Oh, I see there is one additional question. When you say fiber access should be considered to providing access to in-building infrastructure, do you consider bitstream access as a form of such fiber access? From Leszek Droge. Can I hand that over to the co-chairs of the Fixed Wireless Evolution Group? Who will take the floor?
Yes, Francois, maybe you can also jump in on this. I don't think that this is about bitstream. This is only about the in-building segment of the network. But as I said, it's really about considering the use of the cables if they exist if they have been deployed in a building already, rather than jumping immediately to the use of pure physical infrastructure. But then again, nothing concrete on this, because this is really out of scope. So the access conditions or the access product also out of scope really of these BEREC guidelines.
Maybe as a complement, because I understood the question slightly differently, and we had the discussion in the group. The article and the guideline is really about sharing of the physical infrastructure. So it's about sharing the duct. That's what we recommend should be shared for free. We are not saying anything about sharing the fiber itself, or on bitstream, on unbundling, on anything. At least we are not saying anything on the cost. The cost for free we are recommending is really only for the duct. For fiber itself, we just say, before considering sharing the duct, maybe look at if you can share fiber, but we say nothing about how this fiber should be shared.
Okay, thank you both, and I hope that answers the question again. Let's now move to the second part of this meeting, and we're joined by the co-chairs of the Digital Markets Working Group, Chiara Caccinelli from ARCEP and Margarida Melo Santos from ANACOM. And Chiara and Margarida will set out the BEREC's report on domestic submarine cables in different member states. Chiara, Margarida, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Robert, and hi, everybody. So on this draft report, we focus on domestic submarine cable networks. So these submarine cables, they are part, of course, of a global international electronic communication network infrastructure, which is crucial for the whole economy, since it supports the functioning of the internet and of electronic communication services. And in order to better understand the domestic submarine cable systems, ensuring the communication services in Europe specifically, BEREC collected information from its members through a dedicated questionnaire, and also complemented this information with publicly available data. As a result, on the next slide, please. As a result, this draft report, it presents an overview of the domestic submarine cable systems ensuring communication services in Europe, as I was saying, so it is specifically in Europe, and the main purpose of their deployment. Then it provides detailed information on the past and the current ex-ante economic regulatory treatment of submarine cables in different BEREC member countries, including remedies which were or are applied, and also the presentation of three specific case studies in 3 countries, Portugal, Spain, and Iceland. And finally, it also identifies the main challenges and emerging trends according to the NRAs, to national regulatory authorities. And this work is also relevant to support the mapping of existing and planned submarine cables infrastructures under the EU 2025 Action Plan on Cable Security, and also the 2024 Commission recommendation on secure and resilient submarine cable infrastructures. Similarly to the 2 guidelines I mentioned before, the report will also be opened in the same time frame, so until 11th of July. And of course, we welcome all the feedback from the stakeholders, and the publication of the final report is scheduled for mid-December this year. In the second half of the year, we will also organize a workshop in collaboration with Regulatel, so the network of regulators of Latin America, and also EMERG, so for the connectivity in the Mediterranean Sea, and also other regulators network if relevant, and also some stakeholders. And this is, of course, a way for us to collect other relevant information to complement our report. On the next slide, please, I will start giving some main findings. So first of all, according to, so related to the overview of submarine cable system. So the data we collected shows that there is a total of 27 countries with direct access to the sea, of which only 15 have segments of submarine cables connecting national cable landing stations. Most of the submarine cable segments are deployed in the Mediterranean Sea and in the Atlantic Ocean, so almost 80% in total, while almost 16% of the segments are deployed in the Baltic Sea. The large majority of submarine cables corresponds to purely domestic submarine cables, which means that all landing stations are located in the same country, while only 12% of them are part of an international cable system. BEREC also collected information about the primary use of submarine cables, which signals the main motivation for their deployment. And we noticed that a large majority of submarine cables were deployed by ECN operators acting at the retail level and using submarine cables for their own network connections and operations, even if in most cases they also offer wholesale connectivity to others, either through leased lines or rental of dark fiber. Another interesting finding is that almost a third of the submarine cable systems are between 10 and 25 years old. However, 14% of the submarine cable systems started operating over 35 years ago, which may impact the capacity of submarine cable systems in the near future. And the report highlights also that in certain situations, public funding may be needed to ensure the connectivity of national territories, as the business model may not allow the private sector to recover investments. And considering that almost 20% of the domestic submarine cables analyzed in this report, they benefited from public funding, these instruments, such as the Connecting Europe facility, seem to be very important for ensuring connectivity goals associated with submarine cable deployment and security, as well as the renewal of existing aging submarine cables. And I give the floor to Margherita for the next findings as well.
Thank you, Chiara. Next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. So in terms of regulatory treatment, we observed that 6 NRAs, Croatia, France, Greece, Iceland, Portugal, and Spain, have carried out a market analysis regarding or including domestic submarine cables, leading to regulation of submarine cables with designation of an operator with significant market power. Over these 6 NRAs who regulate or have regulated submarine cables, 4 of them, Croatia, Greece, Iceland, and Portugal, are still regulating this market. Whereas the other 2, France and Spain, stopped regulating it, respectively, in 2017 and 2024, but still monitor it. Nevertheless, not all domestic submarine cables are regulated. In fact, according to the information provided by the NRAs, only 138 out of 160 domestic submarine cables in operation are regulated. It is important to refer that different regulatory approaches have been applied. 4 NRAs, Greece, Iceland, Portugal, and Spain, regulate or have regulated this market through Market 14 of the European Recommendation on Relevant Markets of 2003. 1 NRA, France, has done it through Market 4 of the Recommendation 2014, and another, Croatia, has done it through both Market 14 of the Recommendation 2003 and Market 4 of the Recommendation Market 2014. And different remedies were adopted. 3 NRAs imposed or have imposed remedies on access, reference offer, transparency, non-discrimination, and price control. 1 NRA also imposes account separation, and 2 NRAs impose, on the top of the referred obligations, financial reporting. In addition, other forms of regulation were established or are under evaluation. In France, prior to its regulation through market analysis, the NRA adopted guidelines specifying the conditions under which it might be required to apply the legal provisions relating to access to submarine cable systems. While in Italy, economic conditions for wholesale access to submarine cables subject to public fundings are under NRA assessment. Lastly, the regulation and regulatory measures adopted in 3 specific cases were deeply analyzed, specifically in Iceland, Portugal, and Spain. Next slide, please. In what concerns the emerging trends and challenges, we would like to highlight that several NRAs identified in the response to the questionnaire as most relevant challenges the following. First, the security, reliability, and redundancy of the connections provided through submarine cables. The replacement of current submarine cables as the end of their life cycle is approaching, as Chiara referred, and the need for very high investments, especially when submarine cables serve remote areas or coastal villages sparsely populated, where investment is not justified based on future revenues. Other NRAs also pointed out in their answer to the questionnaire that it is key to monitor the evolution of effective competition in the long term, which requires precise data and information from different stakeholders. To this end, it is necessary to explicitly allow NRAs to collect information relating to submarine cables from both public and private entities, like telecom operators or big tech companies, suppliers, among others. As Chiara already referred, this draft report will be open to public consultation from today until the 11th of July. Thus, we kindly invite you to participate in it. Thank you. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you, Chiara and Margarita, for this update. Please stay for questions, but first I will give a short update on a few other items and pieces of news from the plenary meeting. We were able to adopt quite a few documents at this plenary, but we took them in general, a lot of them as A items, because we wanted to create time and space to discuss more strategic issues. So let me just mention the full list of BEREC documents adopted at this plenary. First of all, there is the BEREC annual report for 2024. We adopted a report on WACC parameters for 2025 and a progress report on managing copper network switch off. We had a report on infrastructure sharing as a lever for ECN, ECS environmental sustainability, and a 5th report on stock taking of NRA's application of Article 52.2 for wholesale access obligations. Then we adopted a report on the regulation of physical infrastructure access, and we had a presentation and adoption on the 5th Ukraine roaming monitoring report. Of course, you know, you may or may not know that we're very close to allowing Ukraine into the single market for roaming, and this was one of the last reports in this case that we had to produce. Then finally, we adopted a summary of the BEREC sessions at the ENISA Telecom and Digital Infrastructure Security Forum for 2025. All these documents are available on the BEREC website for download. So if you're interested, then please go there and have a look. If you have specific questions on that, you can approach the co-chairs if necessary to answer or to ask your questions and to have them answered. In addition, and we can go to the next slide, let me update you on some of the past events since the last plenary. A workshop on eco-design of digital services for greener networks and ICTS was held. I opened that workshop. that took place in the IRG offices in Brussels. It was conducted with speakers from public authorities, academia, and industry, and they explored issues such as service compatibility with all the devices, and the application of eco-design principles to technologies like generative AI. A recording of this workshop will be available on the BEREC website soon. And then there was a workshop on practical issues preventing number misuse and possible fraudulent activities as a result of impact of new technologies. Key takeaway of this workshop was that all stakeholders at the event, and they were consumers, European Commission, regulators, law enforcement, the banking industry, and of course telcos, they agreed that open and agile communication between multiple parties and stakeholders is needed to combat scammers and frauds. And I see that many regulators at a national level are really active in this space with operators to try and stop scammers, as this is becoming a bigger and bigger problem. Next slide, please. Another past event you will, of course, be very familiar with was the Stakeholder Forum. It was held in a new venue, the Egg in Brussels, and it was very successful according to the numbers of people that turned up and that participated compared to previous events. It was conducted, of course, as part of our 15th anniversary of BEREC. But we had 611 registrations, 261 organizations were represented, and we had live streams to 49 countries. We want to improve and continuously improve this stakeholder event. It is our kind of key event of the year, and it allows us to really hear from industry and stakeholders what is required for the next year, and that feeds into our work program. So we're always open to take feedback and more feedback. And I want to especially single out the BEREC office and the Slovenian regulator, ACOS, who organized this year's forum, and they did a fantastic job. So thanks very much. Next slide, please. Now we move to upcoming events, and there are a couple of external workshops that I hope you will take note of. On the 26th of June, later on this month, there will be a workshop on the competitive effects of strategic fiber network deployment, including in the context of copper switch-off. This workshop aims to explore the operator's behavior related to the deployment of multiple parallel fiber networks in any given area from a competition perspective. The workshop will be conducted in a hybrid format, allowing for either physical attendance at the IRG premises in Brussels or remote participation. Physical places are scarce and will primarily be reserved for workshop speakers and BEREC members, but if you're really keen to go, let the organizers know and we will see what can be done. Then on the 25th of September, there will be a workshop on the environmental footprint of satellite constellations. This workshop aims to discuss the life cycle impacts, space debris, and sustainable satellite design, with results to be presented in an informative summary report afterwards. A recording will be published on the BEREC public YouTube channel for wider outreach. And then, as I already mentioned, on the 8th of October, there will be the next public debrief. It will take place after the plenary that is happening in the first week of October in Sofia in Bulgaria. It will be an in-person event in the IRG offices in Brussels. Next slide, please. Finally, I just want to repeat what was already mentioned by all the co-chairs, that there are 4 public consultations ongoing at the moment. And please note the deadlines. For the consultation on the BEREC strategy, that is the 15th of July. For the 2 GIA guidelines and for the public consultation on domestic submarine cables, it is the 11th of July. So I've spoken enough now, and I will open the floor for questions that you may have on any of the above items or on the domestic submarine report. Good. Let me see. Any questions? First, let's take a question from Ines Nolasco from first on, has BEREC considered access to in-building infrastructure to deploy, for example, HFC and DOCSIS? Can I hand over to Francois?
Yes. I would say 2 things. First, GIA is about, it's partly technologically neutral in the sense that the main obligations are aimed at deploying very high capacity networks. So it can be something else than the fiber, but it has to be a very high capacity network. And for the fixed technology, as you may know, there is an update being made on the guidelines defining very high capacity networks, the 3rd criteria. We had a public consultation early this year. We are now reading the debrief of this public consultation, and we plan to publish the final guideline by the end of the year. On the other hand, so most of what we are saying would apply both about coordination of civil works and about access to in-building physical infrastructure for Article 5 and 11 would apply as long as it's about a very high capacity network. Then what we said and we discussed earlier about considering fiber sharing, we mentioned fiber rather than something else because Article 10 talks about pre-deploying fiber in new buildings. And this was logical because of this article that in many situations there would be fiber to be shared. So that's why we restricted our recommendation to that. But it's anyway not the main point of our guidelines, as you will have understood. And we are happy to take any comment during the public consultation if you feel the draft document we are submitting is not clear enough. But again, the GIA is quite clear about the fact that what is important to benefit from the rights is to be a very high capacity network.
Thank you very much, Francois. We now move to 2 questions on submarine cables for both co-chairs. One from Tony Shorthall of Talage, which reads, do you look at the supply chain on submarine cables in the report? And then another question from Luis Pereira, who says, will BEREC develop the issues beyond this report? So I hand over to the 2 co-chairs to answer those questions.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for the questions. In what concerns the supply chain, I have to say that the main focus of our report is submarine cables. Submarine cables that provide telecom services and that have at least 2 landing stations in one European country. So we are not really trying to find what is happening in the value chain, but focusing on that specific that we called domestic submarine cables, even if in some circumstances they are a segment of an international submarine cable. So we are looking at those submarine cables specifically and understanding how, if they are being regulated, and if they are being regulated, how, and not on the other entities that may be deploying the submarine cables, also maybe in the value chain of it. Thank you.
And I will take over the second question about BEREC work in the future. And maybe before talking about the future, I can just also remind what has been done in the recent past. So we have published already a couple of reports last year. One was on the general authorization and related frameworks for international submarine connectivity. And another one which was on large content and application providers entering electronic communications networks and services. And in this report, we have a specific chapter on submarine cables, where we are checking how the different actors, so let's say the new actors, which are not so new anymore, have entered the market in the last years, in the last decade, and how this has changed the dynamics in the sector. And so already with these 2 reports, they are already giving like a quite broad overview of the submarine cable markets. And then we also organized in September 2023 a workshop on international submarine cable connectivity in the EU, where we had both telecom operators and also some digital platforms who have been significantly deploying submarine cables, so like Google and Meta and Microsoft as well. So you can find all this work, these references in the current report, which is open to public consultation on page 6. So you will have the references on this. And in the future, what we will do is that we keep, we also highlighted in the report that it is key, of course, to monitor the evolution of the effective competition more in the long term. Also knowing that there are dynamics, different dynamics in the last decade, so with new actors and entering the market. And that's why we also insist on the need to be able to correct precise data and information from different stakeholders. And that's also why this exercise of the public consultation is very relevant for us. And of course, we are also in contact with the European Commission, and we are always available to assist the European Commission for the work that they are carrying out also on this subject. Back to you, Robert.
Thanks very much. That was very extensive and clear. We'll go to the next question from Policy Tracker, from Laura Sear. How do you envision the future of BEREC, seeing that a recent European Commission call for evidence considers changing BEREC's operations or merging it with other entities? What I can say about this is that this was a topic that we discussed to some extent during the plenary, and it will be a topic for a special workshop that will be held later on this year with the Commission involved. The crux of the matter in many ways is that BEREC is not afraid of change or afraid to adopt. But before you can discuss what BEREC should look like, you have to know what its duties will be and what it is supposed to do and under what kind of circumstances. So we always say form follows function, and we need to have a discussion with the Commission first, what the functions of BEREC in the future will be, and then we can find the best form for the organization to go with that. And we're actually looking forward to that discussion, but at the moment I cannot say anything more specific, because first the Commission has to explain better what it intends to do in the DNA, if they can be that specific, before we can have a discussion about the form. Right. Then another question from Tony Shorthall about any reaction yet to the DNA consultation. I assume you mentioned the call for evidence that came out, and no, we are looking at that, and we don't have any news yet on that point from our point of view. Then from Paolo Gracia, a question that says, I see a lot of BEREC events taking place at the IRG Secretariat. Are they part of BEREC? And do they take part in BEREC plenaries? The reason is very simple. The IRG is financed by the regulators. They have an office and a AV system that we can use for these sorts of meetings. And BEREC office, of course, does not have a presence in Brussels. So it's just a pragmatic solution for a problem. And we're very happy as regulators that we can contribute to the work of BEREC. Then there is a question from a private investor called Ernesto Icogo, who asks, with the market and technological developments, are there policy and legislative developments to protect private investment in the European Union? It's a little bit, let's say, out of our comfort zone as BEREC, but we hope that in Europe, private investment is protected as a matter of course. But there is, of course, as you know, an investment is one of the core principles that we have to support as BEREC, together with some other objectives such as consumer welfare and other things. But at the moment, the European Commission, as you know, is looking at changing the regulation, coming up with a Digital Network Act that might change that balance and might follow what the Draghi report is saying to stimulate investment and to stimulate competitiveness in the European industry. So I think the best thing to do is to keep an eye on what the Commission is doing and address your questions to them, because they can feed that into their proposals for the end of the year. Are there any other questions that I need to answer? I don't think so. In that case, then it's a wrap, as they say. I want to thank you all for your attendance and for your attention and for your questions. I hope it was useful, and I hope to see you all at the public debrief on the 8th of October, hopefully in person. And until then, have a good rest of the day and a good holiday in between. Thank you, and thank you very much. Bye-bye.